The hardest problem I face as a Christian is the problem of evil and pain.
The Epicurean quandary. Even though Epicurus was born way back in the 4th century BCE, he was a materialist like me who believed in a theory proposed by Democritus, that material things could be broken down to mere atoms. Isn't it sad that after 23 centuries, atomic theory is still just a theory? I guess it will never be proven. Of all the philosophers of classical antiquity, I think I resonate with Epicurus most of all. I haven't read much from him, but everything I have seen fits my philosophy perfectly. For example, he said, "Do not spoil what you have by desiring what you have not. Remember that what you now have was once among things you only hoped for." I live by that motto. Always have, though I phrase it differently. I say, appreciate what you have while you have it. It's based on a song that was popular when I was a little kid. It says, "You don't know what you've got till it's gone." And I remember thinking, well, that's stupid. Make sure to know what you've got while you've got it. And that has rewarded me for the rest of my life. Epicurus also said that the greatest wealth is to live content with little. I agree with that too. I'm always happy as I can be in the moment, or at least allow myself to be impressed, and I really am content with everything I have. It ain't much, but I don't need much. Epicurus is also credited with having proposed a paradox, popularly known in its modern poetic form. Is God willing to prevent evil, but not able? Then he is not omnipotent. Is he able, but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Then whence cometh evil? Is he neither able nor willing? Then why call him God? If I was alive at that time, I would have thought that this simple soliloquy should have shut down all that superstitious silliness way back when. Yet, for reasons that defy reason, literally, that divine delusion still persists.
My niece getting a tumor at 22 that kills her. What do I say to my sister?
How about nothing? Because Epicurus said, empty is the argument of the philosopher which does not relieve any human suffering. He also said, you don't develop courage by being happy in your relationships every day. You develop it by surviving difficult times and challenging adversity. In the situation of a child dying of cancer, you as a human can do no more than a humanist can. Show your humanity. You as an apologist should keep your mouth shut. I'll tell you why. If you survive leukemia but have a relapse, your chances of surviving again are greatly diminished. It's kind of a factor of evolution, actually. So when my 3-year-old granddaughter had a second relapse, we knew there was very little hope. A pastor, who was a really nice man and well-meaning, heard what we were facing. So he came and he put his hand on my shoulder like a friend would, and he said, "I'll pray for you." As if that useless, meaningless, nothing gesture and lack of effort could possibly make me feel better. As if all of the other grandparents, who were all religious, weren't already praying together, pleading with God in unison, as if God might ignore all of their collective prayers, even though they're all praying for the exact same thing, but he might listen to that one pastor instead, as if all those other prayers are just being tossed into God's spam folder and only that pastor has God's personal cell number. How insulting is that already? But to make it worse, my friend the pastor said that he would pray for me knowing that I was atheist. Maybe he was thinking that in a desperate emotional situation I would break down and discard what he thinks is my atheist belief, and that I would reject logical reason to make believe in magic like he does. That would be irrational, but then so is religious faith. He says that since I know that he really believes in God, then he thought that me knowing that he is praying for me should make me feel better, which of course it can't. So I had to set the minister straight. I said, imagine you're facing a desperate situation of looming doom. Maybe there's something you need that could save you, but it's something you can neither find nor afford. Now imagine that a 4-year-old girl offers that she will write a letter to Santa on your behalf. so that Santa can make whatever it is for you. You know she really believes that, sincerely. She means it. But you also know that her writing a letter to Santa is not going to help. You're still doomed. You need to find another situation, a real solution. So can you really feel better when she tells you that? Now imagine that it's not a 4-year-old who says that, but a 40-year-old saying something equally childishly stupid. How could that be anything other than irritating, especially in such a dire situation?
And this is the hardest problem we face.
Well, there's also the fact that what you want to assume is not evidently true nor even possible, yet you irrationally make believe anyway without being honest enough to admit that you don't know what you're talking about, what you pretend to, because you have to pretend, even if you know it's not true. Atheists are not pretenders like believers are. When people are dealing with real-world situations like the death of a child, they have no more patience for the kind of ridiculous fantasies like you're always spouting.
But it seems to me that atheism here has no answer.
Let me correct you on that. We have no lie to tell, like believers always do. It is religious folks who have no real answers. All you have is the irresponsible nonsense you all make up that doesn't have any demonstrable truth to it, and thus no value in it. I was invited to meet privately with a panel of about 10 chaplains at Children's Hospital here in Dallas, where my own granddaughter died of leukemia in the same week that Christopher Hitchens died. The chaplain asked me to speak with them, noting that with religion in a general state of decline, then more and more of their patients' families are atheist. And they noted how the platitudes they normally say to believers to make believers feel better not only don't work on unbelievers, they have the opposite effect, irritating them even further, sometimes driving them to rage. So they asked me, what can we say to make atheists feel better? And I told them, you're in a tough spot because you have to be truthful. If you tell me that she died because God needed another angel or something stupid like that, I'm going to be pissed off. Real-world situations require real-world solutions. If you don't have that, then there's nothing you can say. All you can do is offer to help, to comfort us however you reasonably can. All we might ever want from you is your compassion. Just make sure that your empathy is respectful and sincere. If it's real, we won't need to hear it. We'll see it in your eyes.
Because by definition, atheism believes that human death is the end.
Well, technically, no. First of all, I remind you that atheism is not a belief, but a non-belief. By definition, atheism means not being convinced that there is a God. Some people are technically atheists, but not skeptical. They may still believe in some aspects of the supernatural. I did myself for many years. I didn't believe in a God, but I did believe in some supernatural things like psionic abilities or a soul or a spiritual form that might live on after I die. Now, of course, I've gotten over all of that. I now understand that the soul does not exist. Not just because there's no evidence of it right where it would be if such were real, but because there is so much evidence against it. Therefore, there can be no afterlife. And thus, the Christian God is moot. And that's fine, because as Epicurus said, why should I fear death? If I am, then death is not. If death is, then I am not. Why should I fear that which can only exist when I do not?
So there is no ultimate hope.
Again, I disagree. My ultimate hope is that I live well, and that when I die, I will be remembered as someone who did well by others too. Epicurus said, the art of living well and the art of dying well are one. I'm glad that I'm not going to live forever. That would be the ultimate doom. And I'm glad to know that isn't real, because it can't be, not without a soul. If I didn't know for sure that souls do not exist, then it would be my ultimate hope that they do not, or that the afterlife is limited somehow so that it inevitably ends eventually, just like real life does. Because when I still believed in supernatural things, I couldn't reconcile how that would work. I couldn't believe in hell. I mean, that notion was so obviously contrived, ridiculously inconsistent, self-contradictory, and logically false that I gave up that belief when I was still a child. But I did believe in a form of reincarnation, wherein I hoped to experience 1,000 lives, maybe in 1,000 forms, maybe as different species, perhaps on different planets. But after thousands of plays of the same video game, there comes a time when you don't want to keep playing, not even a different game. There comes a time when you want to be done. But we're talking about eternity here. So perpetual, stagnant monotony would be inevitable and inescapable. But even supposing that there might be an afterlife is only according to ignorant, superstitious fools who made up theology. Everything apologists have ever said that we can test, they turned out to be wrong about, because they literally don't know what they're talking about. They've never been right about anything, ever, so of course they're obviously wrong about this too.
But you see, ladies and gentlemen, we could stay here till midnight and beyond arguing, as has been done in this university for centuries.
And you still would not have made a single factually accurate or logically valid point. And your inability to recognize your consistent failure to do so would still not cause you to pause and reconsider.
What a good God should, might, would, could, if not possibly might, just could he not have done, and we'll get nowhere.
Because believers refuse to examine their beliefs critically and will not question them honestly. Whereas reasonable people can be reasoned with. We will listen to reason and even reconsider our position if given good reason. We've demonstrated that we can do so because that's how we became atheists.
So it seems to me there's another question we can ask, and it's this. Granted that life presents us with a double picture. We see some beautiful things. We see some ragged edges. We see hurt and pain, and we see joy. How can we come to terms with that?
By realizing that it's not a double picture, that what you're talking about is a single wide-angle view, and that much of the world is between those extremes. Also, you should realize that reality doesn't care about us at all. As Carl Sagan, my most favorite philosopher ever, said, "In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves." Thus, man, as a social animal, must depend on society. And remember what Epicurus said. It is not so much our friends' help that helps us, as the confident knowledge that they will help us.
And it seems to me here is no simplistic answer, but a window into an answer, and it's this. If it is actually true that Jesus is, as I believe him to be, the Son of God.
And it's not. He's not. Or rather, he wasn't, assuming he ever existed in any form that modern Christians would both recognize and accept. Even if such a person did exist, God still does not. But even if a God did exist, Jesus would still only be a first-century faith-healing fraud who died a long time ago, and he's still dead. He's probably going to stay dead.
Then we can ask the question, what is God doing on a cross?
God was never on a cross. Don't you remember when the legend says that Jesus cried out saying, my God, why have you forsaken me?" See, Jesus was talking to God because Jesus himself is not God. When Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do," again, Jesus was not talking to himself. He wasn't calling himself his own dad. And when Jesus cried out, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit," he was hoping to send his non-existent spirit to his non-existent God. He was not trying to commend his spirit into his own hands.
And the answer comes back at the very least. God has not remained distant from our human suffering, but has become part of it.
Well, religion has always been a part of human suffering, most often the cause of it. But God was never part of anything but a collection of fictional fables and phantasms.
And the other side of that is this. Because Jesus rose from the dead,
Objection, speculation, facts not in evidence.
he is going to be the ultimate judge.
No, he isn't. Even Jesus admits that God is the judge, not Jesus. God the Father, also known as El, Allah, Abba, Adonai, and Yahweh, the Alpha and Omega. God said that his name is Jehovah, not Jesus, and he implicitly denied Jesus when he said that there are no other gods beside him and that no one sits to his right, no matter what that upstart impostor Jesus said later on. The Father God Jehovah warned you not to put any other gods before him, yet you did when you believed Jesus said that no one comes to the Father but through me, in violation of the very first commandment. So Jesus is not going to be the ultimate judge, and neither is God, because God didn't write any of our laws, and he doesn't enforce any of our laws. So even if there was a God, we, the living, would never know whatever God decides to do with the deceased, whether he points his thumb up or down, or if he doesn't exist at all. So in any case, the truth is that history will be our judge, which is a good thing, because the Bible God has really poor judgment. And he doesn't judge on the grounds of morality either, because many of the things that God permits or promotes are objectively immoral. Instead, God only judges on one criteria: what or whether you believed. The Bible and the Quran both make clear that believing in God means to do good, and that disbelief is an act of doing evil. So you don't have to actually do evil to be damned. Doesn't matter how much good you do either. If you don't believe, then you'll be damned if you do and damned if you don't. Anyone can get into your magic imaginary heaven if they believe, simply by requesting forgiveness for whatever you did. On the other hand, you could be the greatest and most generous humanitarian benefactor, innocent of every vice and beloved by all, but if you're not a believer, then you're still going to burn in hell forever, because all your good works are like filthy rags to God. Thus, good, innocent people are damned to your hell to be savagely tortured forever, simply because they weren't fool enough to believe the outrageous lies of liars who cannot actually know what they're talking about.
Now here's an irony, because atheism has no ultimate hope of justice by definition.
We don't have anything by definition. Instead, we are defined by one particular thing that we don't have: belief in a God. Justice, however, we can have. Because we are a social species, we can use that society to devise and enforce our own laws, all our own, and mete out penalties that are appropriate and even beneficial, so that in some instances, for example, instead of a criminal being killed or tortured or pointlessly imprisoned, he might be allowed to or required to work so that his victim receive compensatory checks at his expense. This not only makes things right for the victim, which is what real justice would be, but it allows the criminal to redeem himself as well. As I understand it, according to law professors, justice is the ethical, philosophical idea that people are to be treated impartially, fairly, properly, and reasonably by the law and by arbiters of the law, that laws are to ensure that no harm befalls another, and that, where harm is alleged, a remedial action is taken. Both the accuser and the accused receive a morally right consequence merited by their actions. Notice how not one bit of that relates to your God at all, because your God is unfair and unjust. Your God does not provide justice. Your God doesn't even know what justice is. The Bible and the Quran both make justice out to be nothing more than vengeance exaggerated to an infinitely vindictive extreme. That's not justice. So atheists can have hope for actual justice better than the empty threat your God poses. Look at the most secular nations around the world, and you'll see that they do a better job of justice than God does. Whereas the penal systems of sectarian countries, and I'm sad to say that my own country is falling into that, they are famously unjust, being pointlessly cruel and stupid. Christianity fails at justice. The threat of damnation doesn't work because most of America's criminals, and some of the most violent criminals, are already Christian. I don't think anyone who believes in Jesus thinks they're the ones going to hell. Anyone else, perhaps, but not them. Because if you believe in your own personal Jesus, then he has, of course, forgiven you, hasn't he? And he knows exactly why you did what you did and why that guy deserved it. That's why the death penalty doesn't deter believers. Instead, your execution will have you out of prison and seated beside Jesus by this time tomorrow, and you won't have to serve out a life sentence. Christianity preaches only one choice of possible outcomes. It's all or nothing. It's either absolute bliss and heaven for the gullible believers who cower to authority, and merciless, relentless, eternal, savage, brutal torture for the unbelievers and the unrepentant, anybody who doesn't do, think, or believe exactly as they're told to. Obviously, the reason that hell was invented by man was to manipulate the masses into forced conformity, to extort tithing and political power. To serve this purpose, hell doesn't have to actually exist, and it obviously doesn't.
The vast majority of people in the history of the world have died without justice and will die without justice.
So you're saying that your God failed all those people because he let the vast majority of them die without justice? He had one job. What's his excuse? But according to your theology, no one will get justice because your belief system damns unbelievers undeservedly. Then, for anyone who isn't just an unbeliever, but who actually did something wrong, then there's no chance of redemption or rehabilitation. How is any of that compensatory for the victims? Especially when the punishment comes only after death, when it no longer matters. Not only can the victims not even know whether their abusers are being punished, but watching someone suffer more would not make their victims suffer less. That cannot bring them peace or justice and cannot make them whole again. No one should be prosecuted for a thought crime, especially not when rational thinkers are not able to pretend things that they don't think are really true or that can be true. Yet your God punishes people just for what they think. Your religion treats free thought as a capital crime, worthy of execution, just like it did with blasphemy, heresy, and apostasy. Which, if there was any justice in your religion, then none of these would ever have been crimes. Instead, they would all be rights.
And if death is the end, then of course they have no hope of ultimate justice.
You mean the ultimate injustice. Because God's binary reward or punishment system means that petty misdemeanors like unbelief get the exact same punishment and same severity as the most heinous of violent felonies. How is that justice? Think of your niece, perhaps, whom you mentioned earlier, and eventually her mother, your sister. You said that as a Christian, you don't know what to say to your sister, implying that she is not a Christian, that she doesn't believe like you do. If so, then statistically your niece was most likely not a believer either, which means that right now she is being violently violated by demons, and that will continue to the end of time, with her ever aware of her ongoing agony simply because she didn't buy into the same debilitating delusion that you did. Does your niece deserve that? Does your sister? Does anyone? Did anyone ever deserve that? Can eternal punishment ever be justified for a finite crime? Can anyone ever do enough evil to deserve eternal torment in hellfire? Who could ever be evil enough to deserve eternal damnation? Epicurus said, "Nothing is enough for the man to whom enough is too little." So what about that sort of man? A megalomaniacal, malignant narcissist. Someone who is not only a cruel and criminally corrupt convicted felon, but a career fraud who abuses the weak and defames the innocent, and has broken every commandment repeatedly, and who embodies all 7 of the deadly sins. A drug-addicted, bigoted dolt with no human sensibilities or sensitivities, with neither humor, nor love, nor compassion, compunction, nor forgiveness, but who instead is a grotesquely selfish and clearly evil, manipulative, admitted molester and confirmed rapist who lies about everything, cheats everyone at everything, cares about no one but himself, and who is literally public enemy number 1 right now and the worst person of the century so far. An amoral authoritarian dictator who even Christians say really does fit all their criteria to be their Antichrist. He even has his followers wearing his mark on their foreheads. Yet, I say that not even a demented fascist despot, not the one we have now, nor his hero from a century ago, neither of them could ever do enough evil in one lifetime to deserve eternal damnation. But that's what your religion says that your niece is suffering right now and forever. And here you are defending her undeserved damnation because you yourself called her perpetual torment the ultimate justice.
But the promise in the New Testament, guaranteed by the resurrection of Jesus, is that he is to be the judge in the coming day.
No, he isn't. Jesus said that his surviving apostles that he knew in that generation would still be alive to see him coming in the clouds at the right hand of power. But all those guys have been dead for 1900 years now, so there is no coming day. The day is come and gone. You've been stood up. Your boy ain't coming.
So, ladies and gentlemen, those are some of the reasons why I believe that God is real and worthy to be trusted. Thank you.
Just to summarize, your list of alleged reasons amounted to no more than a collection of irrational, illogical assumptions and unsupported assertions, your many misunderstandings of science, your multiple misreadings of religious fiction, your persistent misrepresentation of atheism, misquoting history, and a whole lot of mind quotations and arguments from authority with no relevance to reality, on top of your own fundamental philosophical confusion about reality. You said many things that are either factually false or insignificant, irrelevant, or unintelligible nonsense, but you said nothing that was both verifiably true and supportive of your position. So it is inappropriate or impossible even to consider your arguments to be reasons to believe as you do. Not when you should have known better than all of that decades ago as a student. The hardest problem you face as a Christian or a devotee of any religious faith is trying to believe things that are not evidently true, that are apparently entirely false, and that don't make any sense, not even to you, but that you're determined to pretend otherwise anyway, because believers say it is virtuous to be unreasonable and never admit when you're wrong on any critical point, no matter how often or how obvious that is to everyone. So now that you know some of my many good reasons not to believe in your God, I will leave you with one more quote from Epicurus. He said, "It is folly for a man to pray to the gods for that which he has the power to obtain by himself." And for that same reason, it's also pretty stupid for God to expect us to do his work for him.